Very funny. This was a bit daunting for me. You will understand why shortly. I am pleased and deeply, I can't help this, honored to introduce poet, memoirist, and writer Honor Moore this evening, my dear friend of over 30 years. In this, the 25th year of the Writers' Institute, the silver anniversary of a very special annual gathering of writers and poets who feel themselves to be a family, and that is all of you. As for over 30 years, Honor Moore has been my sister, and so I am well positioned tonight to tell you things about her some of you may not know. I sense a bit of worry from the first row, so let me reassure my friend that my lips remain sealed concerning the time you spent in Lahore, Pakistan, your trips to Cuba, everything having to do with Italy, the attentions of a certain mysterious gentleman, and most especially the pesto-making incident in the Adirondacks. No one will ever wrest from me your confidences regarding what happened in Vienna or the reactions of you-know-who to you-know-what. We're not going there, as they say now. The secrets of your uncommonly adventurous life are safe. I even have an imaginary vault to keep them in, which is getting rather stuffed, I must say. But what I wish to present tonight is something of my admiration for Honor Moore, the writer and poet of exceptional intelligence, sensitivity, and courage. For the young woman who marched in the vanguard of feminism's resurgence in the early 1970s and strove with compassion and valor for the rights of women to justice and equality under the law. Then gently explained to her movement sisters that writing was actually her life. And turning from activism to the pen, she wrote Morning Pictures, the first play by a woman of her generation to be produced on Broadway. As Honor Moore had earlier been the first woman president of the Harvard Theater Club, she was no stranger to path breaking. And having followed her up more than a few Adirondack peaks, I can tell you that her paths are generously marked for those who come after. But one has to keep up, and it is no easy task keeping up with Honor Moore. Just as a life in theater seemed assured, she published her presciently titled first book of poetry, Memoir, groundbreaking for its impassioned recognition of the AIDS epidemic and for a long poem, Spuyten-Duyvil, one of the earliest meditations on the threat of thermonuclear war. Then, without even becoming Canadian, she began writing beautifully in more than one genre, publishing a prose memoir. You know, Margaret Atwood, Michael Ondaatje. The White Blackbird, a life of painter Margaret Sargent by her granddaughter, written in the days before such recuperative work on the lives of women artists had been widely undertaken. In a tender language oscillating between memoir and biography, Honor Moore rescues a struggling woman painter beset by alcohol addiction and manic depression from her buried past, returning her paintings to exhibition walls and writing her way toward an opening for women almost forgotten. With the same love, tact, and intelligence, she then writes her father's hidden life into the life he lived as an activist priest, champion of the poor, and late bishop of the Episcopal Archdiocese of New York. Again, she slashes through the underbrush of proscribed subjects and allows her father his past as a lover of men, a life he was unable to claim for himself. Along the way, she wrote 2 books of poetry, 2 more books, Darling and The Red Shoes, and taken together, we come to her as a poet of lyric virtuosity and erotic intensity, fearlessly taking as her subjects sexual longing, the realm of the sensuous, deep friendship, and precisely disclosed intimacy. A number of astonishing ekphrastic poems can be found here, including one that meditates upon the unavailability of oil paints in Bucharest, Romania, under Ceausescu. There is nothing of womanly feeling that cannot be found here, I thought as I read these poems. And now tonight she will read, at least in part, from a work of poetry in progress. And having seen a few of these poems, I can say that her writing hand has lost none of its courage, has not faltered, and continues to bring to the page a poetry not found elsewhere. I know she is working on a new prose book, too, again a fusion perhaps of memoir and biography, again restoring a life to its fullness. I'm fortunate to have had these years of friendship with her, for which I thank her, and I ask you to join me in welcoming tonight my sister and friend, role model and guide, Honor Moore.
Completely choked up. Thank you, Carolyn. I am thrilled to be here in this 25th year, and I don't know, maybe it's my 12th year or something, and very honored, you should pardon the expression, to be reading with Bill Kennedy, the great Bill Kennedy. When this new book of his is about to break onto the shores of American literature. I'm going to read a couple of poems from Darling, a couple of poems from Red Shoes, and then new poems. The Heron. 1. White city sky, pull of blood down the body, sleep in which I don't lose consciousness. A dark-haired woman with a stump for a hand wades soiled water. Stone to stone, whir of heat, wallpaper, a hired room, past doubled glass, white loops of wrought iron, uptown skyscrapers breaking the clouds. What replaces loss? A pay telephone, rain, night, the separate bed, too much salt. Shift your eyes from the empty chair. Horizon, path through the woods, a river that flows upstream, then at the bridge, a bright rush of gray. She was 50, I suppose, or even younger. I was 5, falling toward her soft, wide flank, though she was not my mother, not that complicated darkness or thin, sallow arm. Again, I dial the number, again busy. It was afternoon, gray light, her English jarred by the language of a place where snow comes early, that the Germans conquered. Blonde hair burning to her scalp at an open oven, comes back brown. Something about a red dress, how she met her husband, who was German, uptown. Take me back to that long afternoon. My mother and father's bed, outside a paved courtyard, broken privet, gate to the street. The old man with one short leg and high black shoe muttering Polish, and out of sight families whose houses burn in the night, a rat scuffing tissue near a hole cut to pee through. She speaks my name as one long vowel. She teaches me the words for cheese. Thank you. As upstairs I lie with her, refusing love because she works for us and because her face offers tenderness, simple as a hand, as ironing a dress. I walk stubble, water through it like silver filigree. It is here I have seen the heron, at a turn in the brook. This is the hill I climb, this the bridge I cross, sky I look at. Each time I wear these clothes, dirt road, then left into the field, farm equipment rust in the pasture. This is where I measure what I've lost, her voice with its northern accent, speaking my name, my mother close to death, or how my father looks now, his white hair and crooked teeth. A black figure on the street passes a white city wall. Light hangs behind a silk shade, and a woman tries to comfort the life I live out long past her death. A bottle of water on dark polished glass. I was in my 20s. She was in tears on the telephone and old. She wanted me happy, she said. Or was it green silk that day she met her husband in Yorkville, where you could dance in the afternoon? The brook turns here, and the great bird rises, wings like the shoulders of a lover. Nocturne. White rose, huge petaled, blown and bruised in that stoneware pitcher, and me so young. A girl who can't know how new she is, but knows spent beauty is an entrance, unfamiliar as her nakedness after the years without men. His hands almost, then touch at her waist. I was about to smooth his hair. 2 larches out a summer window, tomatoes on a black plate, and beneath the surface, fingers in search of music. I hate my hands, he says, and right then I want him to take me, as instead he holds them up to the light, as if to make himself distinct. How almost physical, that music, that white furniture, bruised with us. Disparu. I spent the day with invisible you, your arms invisible around me, holding me blue in your open, invisible eyes. We walked, invisible, invisible and happy, daydreaming sight, as if light were a piano it played on. Invisible, my hand at your well-cut trouser. Invisible, speeding night, the invisible taxi, bare the invisible legs, kissing the vanishing mouths, breasts invisible, my invisible entwining, the sheets white as geese, blue as sky, and darling, how your invisible prick rose, rosy, invisible, invisible, as all night, galloping, swinging, we tilted and sang. Exactly perpendicular. If I lean into the window and look out toward Houston Street, I see the church tower where the bell rings 12 times at noon. Snow is billowing across the sky, settling on the roof of St. Anthony's Hall or on the steps that lead up to the roof of a higher building next door. The rope pulls away and a ship sails down my arm until my hand freezes. My father in a dream, his penis inside me. Excuse me, take it out. Dead of winter in the city. I see sky beyond the low roof of St. Anthony's Hall, then the concrete back wall of the tenements that face the street 1 block west, and to the north, the tar roof of St. Anthony's Church. Night holds down my chest. The sky is white, a thick white. Red that was bright yesterday is dull, and there's a yellow door I haven't seen before. That's where the steps lead. In the dream, my lips wobble. A sheep sails down my arm. Excuse me, take it out. Outside the windows is a piece of rope. Wind knocks repeatedly against the glass, as if this room were a ship and the rope a piece of rigging. There's a peeled tangerine on the radiator. When you bite through the dry skin, juice splashes all over. My father's sister died, and I inherited her silver pencil sharpener. When I returned the dagger to my father, he said it wasn't his. The black blade had a wavy shape. The handle was made of gold encrusted with jewels. The hilt was ebony, and it was broken. My mother dies, and years later, so does my father. Snow is billowing across the sky, resting on St. Anthony's roof or on the steps that lead up to the roof of the higher building next door. The sky is white. The red is a door I haven't seen before. That's where the steps lead. I open the door. Hello. I lift my hands to protect my eyes. The second time, we meet standing. I tell him I will take the taxi with him. Rising sun turns the cement reverse of the church facade bright gold, the cement cross brass against the sky, which is very blue. As day accumulates, colors become true. I prefer the false colors of twilight and dawn. Altogether, there were 2 taxis. I will never forget the bare polished floors, the French doors, the leather sofa I sat on, holding the phone. Something about the room was blue, not the walls. The walls were white and the windows were large. Outside was a street, houses set at measured intervals. There was nothing beautiful about the street, but it was there I understood what happened. There was no penis and there was no blade, but the effect was of cutting. I see the consequences in the clothes I wear in old family photographs, and the stiffness with which my aunt, my father's sister, held herself as she grew old. There is a blue door in the concrete wall, and the sun is at an angle that puts the concrete in shadow, so it seems to be the color of smoke. The blue door looks exactly perpendicular, as if it is in shadow and not blue at all. To whom did the dagger belong? I found it in the closet in my father's house, the house where I lived, the house whose roof was torn off. Outside is a piece of rope. The wind knocks repeatedly against the glass as if this were a ship and the rope a rigging cable. The rope pulls away and the ship sails down my arm. Then my hand freezes. His mouth was fragrant. Freesia, calla lily, gardenia. I was hungry. On the ship, I tell him my hands are cold. He takes them between his and, lifting them to his mouth, breathes on my fingers and palms. There is a black and white photograph of my aunt in her wedding dress. She stands tall and impossibly thin, holding a white bouquet, her long bridal veil swirling around her feet as if she were rising from the waters of Shalott. Absolutely beautiful. When she talked about waltzing, you understood what she believed she had lost. These poems, these new poems, I've been writing sort of in and out of since the last book of poems, since the last book of prose. Waking. Out the window as my eyes open, shadow flap of wing, murmur of doves, then from below a dog barking, a cough, one dove louder. Someone speaks, and a man answers, but not in English. A child counting in the dark, bright segments lifting off, looping back, curling from the pavement, too fast to keep up with. A shout from below. They are loading, one hard thing upon another. Slam of tailgate as, in a sharp flicker of the past, my father, hands on the wheel, drives us home through the tunnel. I have 5 sisters. This is for one of them. For Marion, about the afterlife. Morning lifts the transparent curtain. A child's cry, feet fast on boardwalk, then absurdly a daddy long legs on the pillow, and you are watching it seriously, asking, what do you make of the soul? Of life beyond the present, is that what you mean? And I am suddenly agnostic. A person is just an idea. So no, there can be no life past death, no tall father among us now, walking, hoisting one or another to his shoulders, all laughter as he wiggles an ear, stands at the crest of a mountain, hand to forehead, or pulling one oar at a time, rows a gold boat across the wide, pale lake. I was looking at scrapbooks, old black and whites, Mom laughing at Coney Island, or him, a boy grinning, lanky, his hands on the oars rise as sun falls behind that mountain. How are they not here? Flick of deer flight through pine and birch, loons calling, sleek ripple a beaver leaves diving, your daughter on the shore, picking her way through rocks, your long arms rowing us back. This is very new. Rockmarge Beach. As if the ocean came to her open door, and at that very moment she learned to swim for the first time. Her father holding her small body from beneath, so she thinks she must be floating all by herself. His hand beneath her belly steadies her, then just one finger. She looks up at him, sun bleaching color from what she sees, then sight gone entirely. She can only hear. Ocean, his voice, feeling coolness, water a surface, transparency now, also a place to rest. He was teaching her that if she stayed absolutely still, she could float, even without his hand. At first, she did not believe him, but now she is air. And therefore it's possible, isn't it, the whole world, balanced as she is, might be loosed of weight? His face is looking down at her, and then he rights her small body, little feet to the firm sand bottom, so she stands, and then he turns, lets go of her little hand, white sand. He does not look back, assuming she's behind him, though she is not. Something has happened. The ocean no longer see-through, fast and loud, a roaring upswerve, her feet scooped from beneath, belly scraping sea bottom no longer firm. What had made her weightless, twisting and banging her useless arms? At first she thought it was her father who was pulling her from it. Then, eyes no longer salt-blind, she saw he did not have her father's shape, his beauty, his long arms, or his face. The face was inchoate, like the ocean was when it drew her down, and he wore a hat, so rescue was frightening. She could not breathe or make her way. Grit on her knees, bathing suit scratchy, wet with sand, so she was almost too heavy to stand as she saw her father turning back, the sun blackening his edges. He was moving toward her, an exclamation of surprise and concern she can hear still, but only barely, from this small house, as if ocean receding from an open door, slight and made of screen. Door of years she pulls closed now, quiet green rising through the trees. Story. A big train is coming for the little boy, who is an old man, and I am holding his hand. When is it coming? I can't tell you, little boy, but look. And you'll see a great black shiny train, steam rushing from it. My father sits in his chair in the cold, dark parlor. Oh, tell me, he asks, what time is the train? What should I do? Oh, dear one, I don't know. Look out the window. There's a moon on the snow. When the train comes, you'll see the light. I'm not coming with you. I hold you tight. Sunblind at Huayapam. which is a small town outside Oaxaca in Mexico. Through blue glass, a table painted blue, roses vermilion, amber tumblers, candlesticks, a mirror darkening until all grays in oncoming light. Goats bleat, radio blare, a gunshot. Past the Chalosa, a tree where yellow birds feed, heat and wind from the mountains. Close your eyes and retinas scald the window crimson, mullions bright of orange skin lit from within. Siren, airplane, air enlivened by dogs barking, then a tremor from the interior as if the tree were meant to fall, or this dark could ever be complete. In the cathedral, saints arc downward through gilded vaulting, mouths agape, supplicate arms outstretched as if to thwart a tumble into mortality. Then we are outside, actual sky blue, nothing to foreclose any act of reaching. Or it's night, the only sound breath until the dogs start, each overcoming another, as if the message might get through. Snow White. I woke, and again my eyes were gold, lids keeping light to a slice, the world shrinking and veering. Fearful of stumbling, at first I imagined my skin had slipped from the platform. But when the train left, all that remained was a comb melted, shape of a rail. I could no longer remember the smell of my mother, the black of her hair that so thrilled me as a girl. At first, when I tried, the seal of my right eye seemed to give, but when I opened further, the pain increased. Slits of light sprung from the mirror, every reflection deepening the cut. Even now, when the looking glass blackens, my eyelids clink shut, leaving the air ringing as bracelets do, the gold bangles she never took off. Terrace, Umbria, Italy. Terrace, a plane tree, leaves green as if polished, the reddened tips of fruit trees, a stand of cypress, and through the blackened green a yellow field, slant of roof. Nearer, the castle gate, pale brick flecked with stone, like cream with nutmeg or cinnamon, and climbing, vermilion of roses. Swallows shriek and dive, their shadows loop to mark the wall, then disappear. Courtyard, Civitella. Alem at the window. See her white cloth, her hands in yellow gloves, and behind her darkness. Good morning. A call from the tower. On the steps, Matteo reading Bolaño, then voices, or is it radio? At the black window, yellow hands open, then all you see is white moving, her cloth flat, circling. A swerve of swallows plunges the courtyard. Now Matteo closes his book. A telephone rings, and from the kitchen plates clatter and silverware. As higher up, a backflip of yellow. The sun is blaring. A fracas of bird call breaks the air. A lem in the window. A white rose, then yellow, yellow, rising like a child's sun. This poem is a year old, exactly a year old. It's celebrating its birthday, in fact. Tomorrow, The Poet's Staircase. He hadn't yet parked on the hill with the rest of us. I would have noticed the red car. It was square. So odd. Then it occurred to me he must still park where we all once lived, straight on past the new left turn. He's that nostalgic. All the old films he knows each character of. Musical clips we watched tonight, Recumbent chorus girls, their heads encircled, make a core, long legs opening, closing like shears as he tells each year of release, each girl vanishing, screen going black, lit up violins, ropes of them swoop, untwisting, a lone cello pulses, the entire screen's a black-eyed singer, then giant lips. He tells us her name, recounts filmography, obscurity, fast camera pulling back until all that's left is a dot of light. He does park in the past, he says when I ask. Then he climbs those stairs. It's so much closer to the place we live now, you will see. But night scares me, so I park on the hill and walk up, which takes so long he's there when I pass the stairway. Red car, door opening. He moves in car light like a trapped moth. Door closing, he rounds the darkened car, climbs slowly, startled to see me. I lost my nerve, I say. Just keep on past the turn, he says, until you see that dumpster. And he points to it, rising in shadow where the next night I'll climb and look down, my bare, pale legs taking each stair. Street fluorescent silvering, where through a crack in the asphalt, crabgrass circlets, Queen Anne's lace. Overnight in Key West. Crack in the silence, blades of green a warbler leaps through. The same room, roses on the wallpaper, a deep old tub. And I've opened the blinds. Stripes of light corrugate the bedclothes. Song. Of sheets and skin and fur of him, bed of ground and river, of land or tongue, of arms the wanton field, of flame and flowers stalk of him, harp arboreal, steep and rush. House him in the coil of my hair, silk of him and open sea, flood, star, toes of him, stickiness of flesh, rind of him, gaze of salt and heat, face, food and blade of island, in bright bloom, bristle, blossom, all this night, lie long with him as dark flies fleet, transparent, filled up, emptied out. Hear of him. Here I find his mouth. Naked. And afterward, he bent to the floor, her pearls tangled there like ropes. He did not see her watch as he gathered them, a constellation through his fingers onto that vanished table. The return. After 5 days of rain, of clouds moving, of sudden breaks into blue and wings lifting at dawn from the marsh. After celebration, red silk looped from the ceiling, dusks of dahlia in a still spin of fuchsia. After raspberry, blackberry, juice on every finger, comes a day fire slashes a burn across my hand. Night of no moon, comes sleeplessness inexplicable, comes a weight of ache in the back, drowse after an hour of hardy, a silhouette turned black by a burning at the crown of a hill, comes you, hooded and lupine, brazen and resolute, comes you, on fire, in flames, orange the dahlia, live the ash of burnt alder she pokes with an iron stick. I call it sadness, by now thickened into difficult beauty, lifts her toward you exhausted, entangled, and the sky whites, pine blackening against it, mourning to bring wood for the stove, dahlia for the glass vase, dream of a glass door for the woman again to spin through. I wanted your age, crooked leftover of your arms, the ghost of youth in the rise of your back, its ghost also in the deep turquoise of your eyes. I wanted the flourish of your glamour, the bashful break into laughter. I wanted what you pledged vaguely, the year the war started, when I predicted one day we'd stroll that square in the shade of centurion trees, where I drank easy coffee with friends and talked to you on the telephone, keeping war aside, telling you the mountain I could see out the window, the green birds. But until that night at the Lux, I hadn't seen you in years. My hand in yours, a fast kiss where the burn now is. Hot water bottle here warming you from my limbs, you whose exacting tenderness I still crave. They say the trees went in days, cut down by the new government. The cafes shuttered during the Troubles, along with laughter on the street, outdoor racks of skirts, lace blouses. And the friends I once had there, they've moved to the islands. Last poem, Night Cafe. Who rhymes knives with sight, watches horror late at night? Across the way he phones and orders wine. As diners dine, the knife cuts back to a skirt. A hand there never hurt. The bark hello. Is it me who first goes blank? Cannot greet or thank him at my ear? Silent goes the phone, and knife hits bone. Thank you. Thank you.
First, an announcement. On October 3rd, the day that Bill Kennedy's new novel will be published, he will be reading again from the novel at Page Hall in Albany at 8 o'clock. I hope lots of us will be there. Of course, we have an idea that Bill will be reading from this novel this evening. And he was good enough to give us a proof set a few weeks ago. And so I can tell you, it's vintage Bill Kennedy and then some. Those of us in this room who've heard a few of the chapters in draft versions in recent summers have some notion of what it sounds like. Lots of fast talk you can't find anywhere but in a Kennedy novel. Bits and pieces of songs, old songs mostly, full of spice and rue. A steady mix of high and low, vernacular, sometimes elevated diction, direct and oblique, sexy and quotidian, serious and smart. The alternations so swift and deft that you can never hear the shifting of gears. Lots of material, ideas, issues, what we used to call content, but all of it subordinated to performance. Bill Kennedy has things to say, great stories to tell, but always he is the performer, holding the stage, orchestrating the revels, carrying on, letting go, everything under control, but never in harness, playing one accent against another, throwing one log and then another into the cauldron of his imagination and letting them blaze and sizzle. Too much goes on in Bill's novel. Chango's Beads and Two-Tone Shoes is what it's called, for me or anyone else to neatly summarize. If I say the action of the novel shifts from Havana, Cuba to Albany, New York, you have just some tiny small sense of its range. If you add to that the novel's brisk moves from 1960s race riots to the rise of Fidel Castro in the 50s, its accommodation of everything from the assassination of Robert Kennedy to a journey through the Cuban jungles, you can tell that Bill has aimed right from the start to pull off an improbable feat. Not surprising, then, that he should also have felt it possible to bring together the widest possible cast of characters, from a homeless black alcoholic to a radical Catholic priest, from Bing Crosby to Castro and Ernest Hemingway. The surging, agitated density of Bill's novel would blow out the circuits in just about any other book you can think of. But here, you can hear it, you will hear it, in any 10 or a dozen pages Bill reads from. The pack and the surge release an uncanny, many-voiced music, not a harmless lyricism, but an inconstant oscillation of thrust and parry in which incompatible elements are joined and the writer's exuberance colors everything. Of course, Bill's new novel will inevitably call to mind features of his earlier work. With a writer like this, it isn't only the Albany dimension that establishes the foundation, it's the irrepressible drive to sass and fable, the urge to tell everything you think you want to know about everything in the book, while managing somehow to suggest that there's more you don't know. Mystery is the secret, a Kennedy character once upon a time declared. And even in the garrulous, overloaded precincts of his new book, you feel underneath the action the shadowy, absent cause the writer loves too much to put into words. Bill has always worked with a deep sense of history, with a sense that things can be made more or less believable when you understand where they come from and how their parts cohere. In everything he writes, you feel that things make sense to him and that he writes both to bring things to life and to share his own excited sense of discovery at the miracle of the coherence he has created. But he shares with us as well in all of his work his awe and excitement about all that remains unfathomable. In the new book, as in all of his previous fiction, Bill has used his gift for precise, bursting, naturalistic detail to move beyond surfaces, beyond naturalism, to get at shapes, destinies, states of being that are more than even his words can fully encompass. That's the wonder of it. Bill is a writer fully committed to the action of his novel and to the worldly motives and lusts and bodies of his characters. But Bill's characters are also what we have to call embodied souls, who wear their essences on their bodies and in every move they make. Bill knows, as few of us can ever have known, what makes people alive to themselves and to others. And in writing his books, including this new novel, he delivers us from the inessential, a gift for which we are grateful. Bill Kennedy.
Good evening. Good evening. I love being here with Honor, my old buddy. I love her poems. I love her evocation of ancestral dreams. I love Bob, his introductions. This was the 298th introduction he's given me in the last 25 years. And one more and we're at a 299, and that's almost a perfect game in bowling, you know. And I talked about bowling with Fidel Castro, who's a character in my new novel, but that's another story. Fidel doesn't show up tonight, but some other night. This night, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's not night at all yet, but it will be. And it's June 5th, 1968. Bobby Kennedy was shot just after midnight last night. Daniel Quinn is a newspaper man working for the Times-Union in Albany, and he'll be covering the vigil for Bobby and writing more about the city today, which is full of racial tension and on the verge of race rioting. Quinn's wife is elsewhere on a family duty, and so he has to figure out what to do with his father, George Quinn, who is slightly senile and can't be left alone in the house. Ursula, the family housekeeper who doubles as a keeper of the quixotic father, has totaled her car, broken her arm, and will do no keeping of any sort today. Quinn went upstairs and found his father dressed for dinner, wearing his gray Palm Beach suit, maroon paisley tie, and tying knots in one of his 200 neckties. The ties hung on 5 wooden hangers in the room's closet, a dozen or more of them knotted and re-knotted, one tie outstanding with 4 knots in it. Quinn moved his father away from the ties and began the daily unknotting. "How you feeling?" Quinn asked. "I'm several flavors of excellent. How's yourself?" "I'm tip-top," Quinn said, "but Ursula isn't coming today. She totaled her car and broke her arm." "Was she hurt?" "She broke her arm." "Ursula?" "Yes." "How did she do that?" "She totaled her car." "Was there much damage?" "It was totaled." "That doesn't sound good." "No, and it means we should get you out of the house, get a little recreation. What do you say?" "Recreation is fine if you don't get too much of it." "How about a few hours? That's not too much. Get you out into town. What do you say we go down to the Elks Club?" "How's that sound? I'll drop you when I go to the paper." "There's people who come in and out and you don't know who the hell they are." "Well, you'll know some of them." "It's neglect all the way along." "What do you mean neglect?" "Right up to snuff." "What do you mean snuff?" "The best, the griff, the spiff. The whole thing here is static." "What do you mean static?" "Static has got to be good." "All right, get your hat and we'll get down to the club." "The club?" "The Elks Club. I joined the Elks when the bishop wouldn't let us have beer in the KSC alleys. I remember you were a ringleader in the protest. Beer and bowling go together. You can get both of them down at the club." "The club?" "Get your hat." Quinn called Pat Mahar, custodian of the Elks, and he told him George was coming in and could he keep an eye on him for a couple of hours. "Leave me a message at the paper if he needs anything, Pat. Just keep him busy, give him a beer or two, not too many. Put him in the card room. He can still play blackjack, or in the TV room, or at the pool table. Just get him talking to his friends and he'll be all right. He does what he's told most of the time. I know you're not a nursemaid, Pat, but try to keep him in the club. I'll owe you $20 for your trouble. How's that?" Even with the 20, Quinn didn't trust Pat to do any of this. But it was a start. He'd stop at the club himself when he got a few minutes. What Danny said was, Daniel Quinn, what Danny said was, "There's the Elks Club, Pop, right up those steps, okay?" "Of course it's okay." "It's 2:45. I'll meet you at the club at 6 o'clock. You have your watch?" "Of course I have my watch." And George got out of the car and took 2 steps toward the club, and when Danny pulled away, George turned around to watch him go. He looked up and down the block for the club. He crossed State Street and walked down the hill and crossed Pearl Street. Steps is what Danny said. Steps loomed, 5 of them, brown. Nobody outside. He pushed open the door and he walked across the model marble. He stopped and stared at all the glass and the brass. "Can I help you, sir?" "The club," George said. "Which club might that be, sir?" "It's right up to snuff. This is a bank, sir. Do you have an account with us? I certainly do. Fine, let's take you to a teller. Your name? My name for what? The name on your account. George Quinn. Welcome to the New York State Bank, Mr. Quinn. I'll check your account for you. It's right up to snuff. I'm sure it is. George took his wallet from his back pocket and opened it to find two $5 bills. He poked a finger into a pocket of the wallet and pulled out a check. He opened and read his name on the check. Right over here, you can write your check right here. Here's the pen. Is there anything else I can do for you? What else is there? How much would you like to write the check for, Mr. Quinn? It's got to be enough. I hope it will be. George poised the pen over the check and he thought about numbers. And then he wrote 200 on a blank line. He put down the pen and handed the check to the man at his elbow. You have to sign it, sir. George looked at the check and he picked up the pen. He signed George and gave the check to the man. Your full name, Mr. Quinn. George wrote Quinn after George. Now fill the amount with numbers, said the man. 200 in numbers, 200. George wrote 200 and handed the check to the man, who took it to a teller. He came back and handed the check to George. I'm sorry, Mr. Quinn, I can't cash this. This is one of our checks, but your account here was closed last year. Perhaps you have an account in the Albany Savings Bank, or the National Savings, or City and County Savings, Mechanics and Farmers. Any of those banks sound familiar to you? My bank is close to the club. I'm not sure which club you mean. Why the hell are you in business if you won't cash a check and don't know where the hell anything is? Shall I call Albany Savings for you? I could have someone walk you over there. Don't bother, said George, and he went out. He looked up State Street at the Capitol, which he had watched burn in 1911, and he wondered if they ever finished rebuilding the damn thing. Yes, and maybe no. He had worked in the document room when Jimmy Walker was a senator and Al Smith ran the assembly. Big Bill Sulzer wasn't around yet, was he? It was Al who was the big man. Get me the World, the Sun, the Times, and the Tribune, Georgie, Al would say. Big smile on his kisser. Here's $1. You keep the change. George crossed State and looked at Van Vechten Hall, and he thought of going to Bowman's to meet the ladies. But it's early, isn't it? He felt for his vest pocket watch. No vest, no pocket, no watch. Wrist? There it is, and it's 3 o'clock. Too early. Bowman's musicians don't set up until 7. Hello, George, a fella said. Hello, Bildy, what the hell is his name? Where you off to? The club, George said. You got time for a cup of coffee? All right, said George. Brad's, Bonzi, Bunzi. He turned into the Waldorf cafeteria, and George followed him in and took a ticket. Krenzi, he ordered the coffee. I was talking to the sheriff yesterday, Renzi said, when they sat down. Renzi. He says you're not coming back to work. I told him, Sheriff, George will come back when he's well. I don't think so, he said. I told him, you don't go through 2 cataract operations and get right back at it. George is recovering. That's how it is, George said. I got these new glasses and eye drops. And he showed Renzi his eye drops. Just passing on what he said, just so you know, George, I don't think it's good news. Give him a call. I'll do that, George said. What do you think about Bobby Kennedy? I voted for him. Patsy passed the word to cut him, but I voted for him. I'd vote for anybody named Kennedy. They shot him. Who shot him? Some guy, I don't know who, but they caught him right away. He's probably a communist. Kennedy's not a communist. Get the paper, Georgie. It's all in the paper. After midnight last night out in L.A., he just won the primary, and then they shot him. Who won the primary? Bobby. They shot him because he won the primary? Probably. I voted for him. Call the sheriff and ask him when he expects you back to work, Renzi said. I'll pay for the coffee. and he took George's ticket. "They don't shoot you when you win a primary," George said to Renzi's back. But Renzi kept walking, and George didn't like the coffee. He went back out onto State Street, and he walked toward the Capitol. When Bobby Kennedy came to Albany, George was there. Wasn't I? I was there for Truman when he came in on the back end of a train. When did Bobby come? His old man owns a Standard building. Bootlegging, that's how the Kennedys got their money. It was Jack they shot, not Bobby. His father asked Patsy for an endorsement, and Patsy backed him all the way. Patsy never liked FDR, but he backed Jack. That's how Jack got to be president. They didn't cut Jack. George crossed State Street at Eagle and walked toward City Hall and then past it. Here comes somebody. Vivian. Nice, Vivi. "Hello, Georgie," the woman said. She was wearing a yellow straw hat. "Hello, Vivi," George said, and he tipped his hat. "Going to Bowman's, are you?" Vivian stopped. "Oh, I wish," she said. "Bowman's. Those were the days." "No, Georgie, just going over to Cody's and meet a friend." "Cody's?" "Cody's Havana. You know it well. No Bowman's, no more." "Havana." "I know it. Bowman's." Vivian walked on, and George watched her go. She had legs like, "I'm tying the leaves so they won't fall down and Nellie won't go away." Pog. Legs like Peg. George turned and saw the courthouse, and he stopped. "Can't go there." "Why not?" George turned back toward City Hall, and he saw Chedge coming. Chedge Epstein. And somebody. Fitz. No. Fitzmayer? No. The mayor. They saw him coming and waited at the corner. George crossed to meet them. "Hello, Chudge." "Hello, Ma," George said. "George, where you been? We miss you," the judge said. "Been in and out, up and down," George said. "Damn it all, George, let's get you up to the lake. Get a few fellows together and play a little golf." "You said it, Judge, golf. Haven't played golf in quite a while." "You feeling all right, George?" the mayor asked. "I heard they operated on you." "New glasses, Mayor, new eyes." "That'll improve your putting," the mayor said. "Putt, George said. "Going over to Havana." "Havana, Cuba? I love it down there, but that's a long way to go to play golf," the mayor said. And George sang, "Cuba, that's where I'm going. Cuba, that's where I'll stay." "Haven't heard that one in a while," the mayor said. "Stop in my chambers, George," the judge said. "We'll talk about you coming up for some golf." "I will, Judge, I will. I'll say a prayer for you." "A prayer? You think you can beat me?" "2 Hail Marys," George said. "That's the wrong religion," the judge said. And he and the mayor both laughed and walked up the street. "Judge, Epstein, Morris, always wants me to play golf." George watched the judge and the mayor walk up Washington Avenue, going to have a beer. That's what they do after work. George decided he wanted a beer, wanted it cold, the foam sliced off the top by the bartender and the glass with frost on it. He didn't know where to get such a beer. The club has beer. Where is it? He walked back down State Street, past the Elks Club, and turned onto Lodge Street and up Beaver. He saw the 2nd Police Precinct. Stay out of there. And across from it, he saw a word in the window that he liked. Stanwix. Patsy. He went in and he stood at the bar. People on bar stools were watching television. Bobby Kennedy is out of surgery. It's shocking. In critical condition. The nation is stunned. Big colored fella behind the bar looked at George. "What can I get you?" "What's in the window?" "What do you want?" "The sign in the window." You want the sign? I want that. And he pointed at the neon window sign with Stanwix spelled backward. You want a Stanwix beer, is that it? Yes. What's the name of this place? Cody's, the man said. This isn't the club, I know that. It's Cody's Havana Club, if that's what you mean. Cody's Havana Club, George said. I've been here before. I'll get your beer, the man said. George took a swallow of the beer and he loved it. He looked at it and watched it sweat. He rubbed the sweat, then lifted the glass and he sipped. He loved the taste, the coldness on his tongue and his throat. I should drink more beer. He tipped up the glass and he finished it. He licked the foam off his lips. The bartender looked at him. Do it again? He asked George. Do what again? Have another beer. Good idea. I'll have another beer and do it again. The barman drew another beer. Only costs you $1, he said. What does? The beer. $1? That's a way too much. Beer costs a nickel. Some places they charge a dime. A glass of Bordeaux wine costs 10 cents in Paris. That's before I was born, the bartender said. You want a beer today, it's 50 cents a glass, and you had 2 glasses. $1. George took out his wallet and fished for one of his $5 bills. He gave it to the man and stared at him. Is your name Dick? George asked. No. You look a lot like a friend of mine. I haven't seen him in a while. You know Van Wart Street? I do, the bartender said. Dick, that was his name. Dick Hawkins. Did you know him? Never heard of him. Nigger Dick Hawkins, George said. He could go in and out of anybody's house on Van Wart Street just like a white man. Nigger Dick on Van Wart Street. Imagine that, the bartender said. Wonderful fella, George said. He'd do anything for me. They'd come around and tell me this and that, and Dick would say to them, you leave this kid alone, he's a friend of mine. And they'd never touch me. Looked a lot like you. Is your name Dick by any chance? No, my name is George, Nigger George. I live on Van Wart Street. You ever heard of me? No, can't say that I have, and I live on Van Wart Street. Nigger Dick, I know, wonderful fella, looks just like you. He'd do anything for me. You know what I'll do for you, the bartender asked? No. I'll get your change, you'll finish your beer, and then I'll kick your ass the fuck out of this bar. Hey, what are you saying? I'm saying I don't want your business, motherfucker. Are you crazy? You can't use this language in public. There's women in here. Everybody in the bar was looking at George, man wearing his shirt outside his pants, 2 women in straw hats. George tipped his hat to the women who were sitting at the bar, separated by 1 stool. That looks like Vivian. George saw them all staring as if they expected something from him, so he picked up his beer and he raised a toast. I care not for riches or wealth of the best. I care not for finery grand. Just give me a lass who owns a good name and give me a willing hand. He smiled and took a mouthful of his second beer. The woman in the yellow straw hat raised her glass to George and took a sip. He's all right, Roy, she said to the bartender. Sure he is, Roy said. No, she said, I know him a long time. He works in the court. He handles the grand juries. George broke into song. Goodbye, gang, I'm through. Old pals I can't forget, I say goodbye to you without the least regret. I know that song, the woman said, and she sang along with George. I'm through with all flirtations. There'll be no more fascinations. There is one to whom I'm true. Goodbye, boys, goodbye, girls. Goodbye, gang, I'm through. Behind the bar, Roy turned up the volume on the news show. The woman came over to George at the bar. George Quinn, she said, you're still a rascal. George Josephus Jeremiah Randolph Franklin Aloysius Quinn, he said. A pleasure to see you, my dear. Will you kiss me now or will you wait? You're a scream. The last time we were in a bar together was at Farnham's. Do you remember? Farnham's is a wonderful place, right up to snuff. Oh, I know. I love the atmosphere, the dark, wonderful, dark wood. The atmosphere is wonderful, George said. The wood. You mustn't mind the bartender, George. He's a sensitive boy. He doesn't like the words you used. What word? Nigger, she said. She whispered it. Nigger Dick, I knew him well. Yes, but you shouldn't say his name like that anymore. Just call him Dick and don't say nigger. That's his name, Nigger Dick. He was part of the Sheridan Avenue gang. I knew every one of them. There was only one Nigger Dick. Don't say it anymore, okay? You understand? Don't say it or he'll throw you out. Roy can get very excited. Roy? Who's Roy? The bartender. He said his name was George, but it isn't. Right. He's not George. I'm George. You certainly are. George Quinn. That's me. Will you be going to dancing this evening at Bowman's? You're still thinking about Bowman's. It's right up to snuff. King Jazz's orchestra. You can't beat it. I don't recall your name. Vivian Sexton, George. You know me 100 years. George took off his hat and held it out to her. It's venerable to know you so long, Vivian, he said. You are such a gentleman, she said. I would be privileged to buy you a drink, Vivian. We could sit at that table over there. I'm on my way to the club and I have to cash a check. The clock of life is wound but once, and no man has the power to tell where the hands will stop. That certainly is true, George, and it's a very poetic thing to say. I'd be glad to have a drink with you. George placed his hat over his heart, and he asked her, will you kiss me now or will you wait? And Vivian kissed him on the cheek. Cody Mason, a great jazz pianist, the owner of this club, also the father of Roy, the bartender, arrives, and George greets him. They're old friends. And there's another man at the bar who's also connected to George, but George doesn't understand this, Max Osborne, who knows George from years before. And Max has been talking to Cody, and George walks over and asks Cody, are you going to play us a tune, Cody? Not now, George, he said, but I got a concert tonight. You don't say, a concert. Over at the DeWitt. Will there be dancing? Gotta be. Mike Flanagan's band's playing with me. It's a fundraiser. $20 a pop, Roy said. Includes food. $20, George said. That's out of my league. $5 if you don't eat dinner, Roy said. That's good, said George. $5 for no dinner. Max put a $10 bill on the bar. Gotta move, Cody. I'll try to catch some of the concert. His concert tickets were still on the bar. He pushed them toward George. See the concert on me, George, Max said. Dinner included. George picked up the tickets. These are for me? All yours, Max said, and he left the bar. Roy looked across the bar at George. You got yourself a night in a town, Dickie Bird. Dickie Bird, George said. Is your name Dick? You look a lot like a friend of mine. Don't start, Roy said, and he moved down the bar. George went back to Vivian and put the tickets on the table in front of her. He took off his hat and put it over his heart. Vivian, may I call you Vivian? You certainly may. Vivian, there's a concert this evening at the DeWitt, and it would be wonderful if you could join me. They're serving food, and I relish the hope that you'll have dinner with me. That is so lovely, George. I'd be very happy to join you. The man said there would be dancing. Oh, good. Then we won't need Bowman's, will we? Bowman's, George said. When is the concert, she asked. George read the ticket. 7:30 is dinner, he said. Well, then we should be going, Vivian said. They stood up, and George gestured her toward the door where Cody was talking with Max. Thank you for those tickets, sir, George said to Max. Max, George, call me Max. Max, thank you. Cody, will you be at the concert? I sure will, George, Cody said. Then I'll see you there. and George offered his arm to Vivian, and they walked out onto Eagle Street. George stopped outside the bar and looked in both directions, torn. But Vivian stepped out toward the DeWitt Clinton Hotel. "I'd like to go to the bank and cash a check," George said. "Banks are all closed now, George," Vivian said. "Are they? Then let's stop at Big Jimmy's. He'll cash a check for me any time. He owes me." "I got money, George. Don't worry about it. You won't need money for the dinner. You got the tickets. And I'd like to stop at the house before we go anywhere." "The house?" "My house. It's just a couple of blocks over on Columbia Street. We still have time." "Columbia Street? I lived on Columbia Street." "You did? I thought you lived on Van Wart Street." "I lived on Van Wart Street after my parents died." "They died together, didn't they?" "I think they did." "What happened?" "It was a big accident." "A train wreck?" "That sounds right, a train wreck." "What did your father do?" "He was in the Civil War. He knew very big people. Grant, Lincoln, and Clover. Adam Blake, Sheridan. He wrote for newspapers. Grover. He wrote a book, in fact, 2 books. Commodore Cleveland, Cuba. Maybe 3 books. I'll have to look it up. He knew Lincoln. He shook his hand at the Delavan House. And he knew General Grant. He was invited to his funeral. Your father was an important man, Vivian said. They could see the Capitol now from Eagle Street. 1913 it was, when George was close to power. Martin H. Glynn was an important fella, he said. He made a speech when they put General Sheridan's statue in over there. He was Big Bill Sulzer's lieutenant governor. Chew Tobacco Bill. They kicked Bill out of being governor. George had often been in Sulzer's office, and then in Glynn's after they impeached Sulzer and Glynn took over as governor. I came home from the glove factory to vote for Glynn in 1914. And you knew Mr. Glynn? He ran the Times-Union after he lost. Killed himself over his back pain. If he had money, he could have been one of my closest friends. Vivian smiled and tightened her grip on George's arm. Mr. George Quinn, who knows everybody. We'll have a good time tonight. Arm in arm, George Quinn, arm in arm with... He looked at Vivian. With Vivian, a friend, old friend. Bowman's, we knew. Other places on the water? Altro Park on the Hudson? He looked at her again. He liked her hat. Who had a hat like that? Pegger. Peg. Peg. But Peg's hat was white straw. I'm tying the leaves so they won't fall down. He patted her arm, bare arm. Whose? Vivian, he said, and she smiled, and then he sang. Altro Park on the Hudson, that's the place for me. There's singing and dancing when you're out on a lark. Take a trip with your sweetheart to Altro Park. All right, said Vivian, here we go. Vivian lived in a second-floor flat on Columbia Street, just up from North Pearl. She opened the door and held it for George and went into the front room and took it all in. Nice furniture, clean, doilies on the arms of the chairs, Persian rug, shiny table, walnut polished, pictures on the wall. W.E. Drislane, Choice Family Grocers. Biggest grocer in Albany. Vivian Drislane? Drislane's, George said, looking at the old photo. On Pearl Street. I was in it many a time. Wonderful store. They bottle their own beer. One of my uncles was a Drislane, Vivian said. Very neat room, George said, not a pin out of place. I suppose I'm neat, Vivian said, but I don't have anybody to mess the place up. Can I get you a beer? Or a highball? Friend highball, said George. Highball it is. And Vivian went to the kitchen. Her bay window looked up the street to the back entrance of the courthouse where George worked for so long. Supreme Court of the State of New York, to be held in and for the County of Albany, Honorable Justice Morris Epstein presiding, hear ye. "I was born on this street," George said. But Vivian didn't hear him. In the kitchen, Vivian opened a half-full bottle of White Horse and poured ample shots into 2 cut-glass tumblers. She ran water to loosen an ice tray and added a bit of tap water to the mix, and then came into the parlor and handed George the tumbler. "Friend highball," he said. And she clinked glasses with him. "Sit down, George. Relax while I change my dress and spruce up." George sipped the highball, and he did not sit. He watched her. "Okay, don't sit down. I'll be back." She went to the bedroom with her highball. Her moves were familiar. Peg? Vivian, was it? Arms and legs. The way she carried herself on the high heels. Very erect. Very similar. And that front on her. A nice size. "Her dress looks fine the way it is." "You don't need to change your dress," he said. "That's a very nice dress you're wearing." "But I've had it on all day and I'm going out dancing," she said from the bedroom. "Is your highball all right?" "Friend highball," George said. He looked at it and then he sang to it. Friend highball, you've been a dear pal to me." He kept singing as he walked to the bedroom door, which was ajar. "Years may come, years may go, but forever my comrade you'll be." Vivian, in her slip, was taking a robe from the closet. You don't often see them like that. Friend highball, what memories you recall." "Georgie, you're peeking at me." "When trouble draws near me, the first one to cheer me is my dear old friend highball." "You know all the songs," Vivian said, and she pushed her arms into the robe and then opened the door wide. "Come in if you like, I don't mind." She put her dress on the hanger and hung it on the hook. "Very coquettish, this room," George said. He looked at a picture of Pierrot and Columbine that hung above her bed next to a crucifix. "I don't see the hoi polloi." He stared at her. "You want to look at me, do you?" "Looking at you is one of the pleasures of what they call a sight for sorry eyes, a proviso, a take-up for the fair and fancy." "So I don't look so bad for an old lady?" "I don't see any old ladies on this block." "Well, you're a dear, but age is age." She picked up her highball from the dresser. "Shall we sit in the parlor?" She pulled her robe together at the front, but as she sat in the platform rocker, the robe fell open again. "That is a lovely color," George said, pointing at her slip as she sat across from him he sat across from her in the armchair. "Well, they all wear pink, but I like pale yellow because it goes with my hair, some of my hair." Peg likes black slips. Peg likes black slips and white. Peg had the most beautiful black hair, Vivian said. Peg was a beautiful girl. I knew her since we were in school. Was it a big shock to you about her? Shock? That picture in the Daily News of her and her boss on the Atlantic City boardwalk. I was in Atlantic City when Zalgosh shot McKinley. I never saw any newspaper. I understand. You don't want to talk about it. She crossed her legs. Those stockings remind me, George said. Wonderful legs. I always liked the stockings. Sheer, they call them, if I'm not mistaken. Some legs are thick at the ankles. Beef to the hoof, we used to say. But not Peg, and no beef there, and he pointed at Vivian's ankles. Those legs are always just right. They slope in and out. Straight legs don't have the makings. Those women look like 6 o'clock, straight up and down. But not those slopes. and he moved his hands in a churning motion at Vivian's legs. When they slope up and down and in and out like these here, they're a great glimmer. The thing about legs, a great glimpse. You couldn't predicate a thing like that right there without saying to yourself, George, what hills will those legs climb? They are prize-winning. Those legs can waltz, and I've seen them do it. Invite her to waltz, that's the main thing. Always invite her to waltz. Vivian uncrossed her legs and extended her right leg, pointing the toe of her right shoe at George. That's my prize winner, she said. That's a honey of an outlook, George said. Beautiful is what I say. He could see her thigh above the garter. He raised his glass. Here's to it and from it, he said. You like to see me this way? I haven't seen this kind of contention. Oh, sure you have. Peg had great legs. She was a beauty. She got a little heavy at the end, but she didn't lose it in her legs. Didn't Peg sit like this for you? Vivian brought her foot back to the floor and her slip rode upward, putting both thighs on display. Peg let you know where you stood, George said, where you could pile up her questions. How's it going? What kind of pork chops do you like? Pinochle or poker? Peg knew all the detours on the way to any place you wanted to swim or shoot to shoot or rent a boat. I like the pork chops, Vivian said. Some things are miraculous before you know what they are. He gestured at her with an open palm. Ed loved to sit where you're sitting, and I do these things for him, Vivian said. She pushed her robe off the right shoulder and then off the left. I went with Ed for 22 years. He gave me an engagement ring when Eisenhower was elected. We weren't like married people. I wasn't cut out to be the little wifey. I don't know what I was cut out to be, Georgie. Ed and I were together 4 or 5 nights a week. We'd go to the movies, have dinner, then we'd come back here. He'd get me to take off this and then that. He liked me to make the first move, and he loved me to talk. Say it, Viv. Talk about it. That's what he'd say. And I'd say to him, you mean my vag? Yes, he said, your vag. And I'd tell him about my vag and how it felt, and he'd tell me what it looked like to him and how he loved it. We could go on for quite a while until the words did what they were supposed to do, and then we'd do it. Veg, George said. That's my word, Vivian said. I invented it for Eddie. I never say it anymore. I haven't said it in 8 years. I guess that means I want you to look at me the way Eddie used to. George stood and took off his coat and loosened his tie. He raised his highball on a toast. Here's to it and from it and to it again. When you get to it, do it, for you never get the chance to get to it again. He drained the highball and set it on a table. He sat down and he stared at Vivian's center. That's what Ed used to do, she said. George hummed a few notes. Let me. 40 years in the post office, and then he died. I never figured it out. Still haven't. I should have grabbed you when I had a chance. Why would you grab me? We went out twice. I met you down at Kinderhook Lake in Electric Park by the Ferris wheel. We danced a few dances at the pavilion, and then we came back to Albany on the trolley. A week later, you took me dancing out to Snyder's Lake in your convertible. You were with a bunch of sassy fellows with mouths on them. You weren't that way, but I thought you might be, so I didn't encourage you. And then Peg took you out of circulation. Electric Park only kept the lights on till 10, and then the Hicks all went to sleep. The last trolley was at 10:15, 35 minutes to Albany, a grand ride even in the dark. Sometimes romance went on in the back of the trolley, Vivian said, and she shifted her body forward, closer to George. You're a lovely man, Georgie. He put his hand on her stocking so that his forefinger touched the flesh of her thigh. "Let me call you sweetheart," he said. "You can call me that." And he sang, "Let me hear you whisper that you love me too." "Love," whispered Vivian. "Where do they keep it?" "Will you dance with me, Vivian, is it?" "I surely will, Georgie." And she stood and tossed her robe onto a chair. "Keep the love light glowing in your eyes so true." George put his right arm around her waist as he sang. He put one finger under the straps of her slip and her bra and moved them downward until her left breast was free, and then he kissed it. "Oh, Georgie, it's so nice to have you here tonight. Let me call you sweetheart." And as he sang, he tried to move her to the waltz tempo, but the crowded room allowed for no pivoting, and so he waltzed her in place, his feet moving 1, 2, 3, with hers doing the same. But he held her so they did not move forward, just 1, 2, 3, and again, in place. Right here is just fine, and it's getting better. And he ended the song. "I'm in love with you." He stopped moving and kissed Vivian, a long kiss. There's something about a kiss that you can't get anyplace else. Veg, is that it? That's it, Georgie, you got it.